Draco Malfoy and the Truth of the Heart by Draco will hear about this. Chapter 21. Living On. When Draco woke up the next morning, it took him a moment to take stock of the situation. He was in his room in Andromeda's house. Harry was holding him. The war was over. Harry had won against the Dark Lord, but not before the Dark Lord had murdered Harry. Draco shuddered and Harry's arms around Draco tightened.
"You're awake,"
he whispered. "What time is it?" Draco asked.
"I don't know,"
Harry admitted.
"I wanted to let you sleep."
Draco nodded. Then he sat up. Harry's arms around him loosened to let him move. Draco glanced at Harry. His hair was a mess, and his skin was still flecked with dirt from last night's fight. He was wearing the same t-shirt he had throughout the whole battle, but he had kicked off his jeans and had opted to sleep only in his boxers. "We both need showers," Draco said pragmatically.
"Yeah."
Harry frowned, his eyes flickering down to himself.
"I'll have to borrow something of yours until I pick up my things from the burrow."
"There's enough in the cupboard," Draco shrugged. "Help yourself." He hesitated, then he asked, "Are you going to stay with the Weasleys again?"
"No."
Harry shook his head.
"I'll stay with you. He gulped. "I hope that's all right with Andromeda. I'll have to talk to her first, but I don't like the idea of being separated from you."
Draco gave him some strange mix between a shrug and a nod. Harry just looked at him as he got to his feet. Andromeda and Ted were to be found in the kitchen. They both smiled at them warmly, and Andromeda fussed in a way that was a bit unlike her, if Draco was honest. But Draco didn't blame her. He'd been gone for a long time. They'd all been.
"Dora and Remus are back at their house with Teddy,"
she explained as she handed Draco and Harry a plate of scrambled eggs each.
"And Narcissa is at the safe house for the moment, handling some things."
Draco frowned. "Why didn't she come here?" he asked. She hesitated before meeting his eyes.
"She went there with your father,"
his aunt told him gently.
Draco felt cold all over.
"What?" he ground out.
"Draco,"
Harry whispered, reaching for his hand, but he pulled it away. He was staring at his aunt, anger boiling inside of him. "She's going back to him!" he snapped.
"I'm not sure what she's doing, Draco."
She shook her head, looking sad.
"It's her decision."
"He stood by when I was tortured!" Draco said, his voice rising. "You can't tell me she's honestly going to go back to play Happy Family after that!"
"Draco, there's something you should know,"
Harry said urgently. "What?" Draco hissed, turning on him. He didn't understand what was going on. At least when it came to Lucius Malfoy, Harry had always been on his side, and now he looked at Draco like he was the unreasonable one.
"Your father, he saved my life in the forest yesterday,"
Harry said.
After he killed me, and it didn't take, I guess, he sent Lucius to check whether I was really dead, and when he realized I wasn't, he asked me if you were alive. I nodded, and he told him I was dead. He lied to get to you. I couldn't have ended this war without him."
Draco stared at him, long and hard. The silence around the table was total. "Listen, kiddo," Ted said. "You don't have to forgive it. I'm not sure I would in your position. But your mother is an adult and she has to make her own choices." Draco turned back to his plate, staring at his eggs. They could have as well been worms for all he felt like eating them all of a sudden.
"Draco,"
Harry whispered, trying to reach out for him again, but Draco got to his feet, pushing away from the table. "I need a shower," he announced. He could feel all eyes on his back as he retreated, but he didn't look back at them.
"Do you want to come to the burrow with me?"
Harry asked tentatively, watching Draco as he sat cowering in a corner of his bed, nose stuck in an old alchemy book. Draco shook his head, not looking up. Harry sighed.
"Okay."
He breathed.
"I'll be back by dinner. I'll bring your things from Hermione's beaded bag, too."
He hesitated before adding,
"Rest. I'll tell everyone you said hi."
Draco just nodded. He didn't look up as Harry retreated, closing the door behind him. That evening, Harry returned with Hermione in tow. He left the two of them to it for a while, letting them sort through all the books and knick-knack Hermione had taken along that had originally been Draco's. Draco was taciturn as they worked, and he was aware that his friend was watching him.
"Are you okay?" she asked at last. "You seem down."
"I'm fine," Draco lied. She looked at him, clearly unhappy with his answer.
"You don't have to be, you know," she murmured. "If something's on your mind, we're here for you. Me, Harry, or even Ginny, Remus. Whoever you need will listen."
That was all great, Draco thought, but even if he wanted to talk, he had no idea what he would say. How did you put into words that even though you'd won the war, even though everything was supposed to be amazing, it wasn't, and you didn't really know what was wrong? "I'm fine," Draco only repeated, picking up one of the books she had returned to him and flicking through it. "Thanks for the offer." Hermione sighed, but she gave it a rest, and Draco was grateful.
"Are you still angry with me?"
Harry asked Draco as they went to bed that night, his voice terribly small. Yes, the bitter, nasty part of Draco thought, but he knew it wasn't right. He wasn't angry exactly. He didn't know what he felt. He felt empty mostly. So Draco forced his voice to soften as he answered, "No." Harry's arms were around him immediately, holding him as if he was something breakable.
"I love you,"
Harry breathed, and his voice hitched. "I love you too," Draco answered. That at least was the truth. His mother came over for lunch the next morning. She took one look at her son's face and let out a sad sigh.
"Darling," she whispered, "please listen."
"Are you going back to him?" Draco demanded, his voice hard.
She hesitated. "I haven't decided yet," she replied. "But for now, we are still married, and that means something to me, even if you can't quite understand that."
"You know what he's done," Draco breathed. "What he's done while you were in hiding too."
"Yes," she admitted, her voice heavy. "He told me everything. He regrets it very much."
"You've got to be fucking kidding me!" Draco snapped.
"Language, Draco," Narcissa sighed.
"No!" Draco called, getting to his feet. "He gets to stand by while I get fucking tortured, and I get scolded for not minding my language. That's not how it works, Mother." She was silent for a long moment. She looked very, very sad.
"Did Harry tell you what he's done?" she asked. At the end,
"I don't care!" Draco shouted. "It's too little, too late. One good deed doesn't redeem 100 bad ones."
"He loves you, Draco," Narcissa breathed.
"He made a lot of mistakes, but that's not love, Mother!" Draco spat. "The way he behaved, nothing about that was love. He loves no one but himself." Narcissa shook her head.
"I see. I can't change your mind," she muttered. "And it's your right to be angry. You haven't known any kindness from him in a long time. Maybe one day you'll be able to see past your anger."
"I shouldn't have to," Draco interrupted her, his voice hard. She sighed deeply. Then she took a deep breath before she continued.
"It's your choice, and I'll respect that. But please try to respect my choice of being a wife to him for as long as I'll be allowed to. We can't be sure of the future at the moment. He'll be put on trial, and if he goes to Azkaban, he might not come back."
"He doesn't deserve to," Draco whispered. She didn't answer, and she asked in a forcibly calm voice.
"I guess it would be futile asking you to give testimony at his trial."
"No!" Draco interrupted her, his voice hard. "I won't do it. I won't ever see him again or be associated with him. I don't have a father anymore." Narcissa gulped.
"I see,"
she nodded. Draco thought it was no coincidence that Remus and Dora visited that afternoon with the baby.
"Daddy wanted to see Uncle Draco,"
Dora beamed. Draco wanted to point out that Teddy, at 2 months old, couldn't care less about visiting Draco, who he'd only seen once in his life, and that in passing, but at that moment Teddy's hair turned from mouse gray to blonde. Draco raised his eyebrows, the words dying in his throat. Draco had never had to interact with babies before. He'd been the youngest in his family up until now, and even when it came to younger kids at Hogwarts, he'd usually kept his distance until they'd hit at least puberty. Now he found himself with a baby in his arms, Dora gently adjusting his position or giving him advice, and it was a bit overwhelming, to be honest. What if he dropped his godson? That would make him the worst godfather in the history of godfathers. But he didn't drop him, and Teddy didn't voice any displeasure at being held by him. Much to the contrary, he kept batting at his hair, which he seemed to find utterly fascinating.
I know, buddy,
Harry commented from in the armchair, watching the scene with a soft smile.
I can relate.
Teddy made a soft gurgling sound as if he'd understood, and Dora laughed. Eventually, Teddy was shifted into Harry's arms, and Draco went into the kitchen to wipe off the drool he'd left in his wake. Remus followed him.
He likes you,
Remus told him. He's a baby, Draco scoffed. He likes everyone and no one. No, Remus struggled. Don't burst our bubble. Let us have our fun. Draco snorted, holding his hands under the running water. Remus studied him. Are you all right, Draco? He asked at last. Draco rolled his eyes. Who sent you? He challenged. Harry? My mother? Hermione? No one, actually. He parried Draco's accusations. You simply seem a bit off, and after what happened at the final battle, I wouldn't be surprised if you were still gnawing on that, is all. Draco gulped. He turned off the water and grabbed the towel to dry off his hand. He glanced at Remus and then looked out through the window. It was raining. The weather matched Draco's mood. I'm not sure what's wrong, Draco admitted. I just feel weird. Remus nodded, leaning against the counter and giving him his full attention. Weird how? He asked. Not myself, Draco tried. I'm all over the place. One moment I don't feel anything, like I was drained and I'm fresh out of emotion. And then the next moment I get really angry. I see, Remus frowned. Angry at what, may I ask? Do you have something that triggers you, or... Everything triggers me, Draco shrugged. Some is rational, some isn't. I think this makes sense, Remus said. You probably don't see it that way, but the things you've been through, Draco, your childhood, and adolescence for that matter, has thoroughly been compromised by this war, and now it's over. This is all catching up to you. I think it would be inhuman if you hadn't carried away a trauma or two from the experience. I don't have any reason to complain, Draco reminded him. Everyone I care about survived. We won. Draco, this is not how this works. Remus shook his head. We've all been victims of this war no matter what we had to pay throughout. This is not a competition. Just because others have suffered more doesn't mean your suffering is any less real. You get to feel this. You need to, even. Otherwise it will haunt you forever. Draco stared at him. So I can't just make it go away? He asked. No, Remus smiled. The mind isn't as easily healed as the body, Draco. You can take potions to fix the symptoms, but it won't fix the problem. Only time and hard work can do that. You need to work through this. How? Draco asked. That's up to you, Remus sighed. Talking helps in my experience. Being surrounded by people who love you and who you love. You can lean on them when things get rough. They might not always understand, but they can listen. If that doesn't help, there are mind healers who specialize on helping you deal with trauma or depression. None of these options sounded especially appealing, Draco thought privately. Thankfully, he was saved from saying so when Harry disappeared in the kitchen door, looking flustered.
Teddy was hungry,
he explained, and Draco realized that his cousin had likely whipped out her boobs and started feeding, taking Harry by surprise. You'll have to get used to that now, Remus smiled.
I know.
Harry sighed, rubbing his face.
It was just sudden, okay?
Then he looked from Draco to Remus.
Did I interrupt something? Should I go back?
It's fine. Draco waved him off. He saw Harry's and Remus's gaze hold for a moment and wondered what they were wordlessly communicating. Was everyone having conversations about him behind his back, or even in front of his face? He refrained from commenting, though. Instead, he turned to the cupboard to look for pumpkin juice. You want something to drink? He asked.
Sure.
The two of them chorused. He took his time pouring them all a glass. When he turned back, they acted as if they hadn't silently conversed about him. I'll go bring this to Dora, he announced, pointing to the other glass. Without waiting for a response, he left the kitchen. Now they could talk about him without minding his presence, the thought grimly. Dora was sat on the couch looking content as she fed Teddy. She smiled at Draco as he sat next to her. "I brought you some juice," he said, putting the glass onto the table.
"Thanks,"
she chuckled. Then she nodded to the kitchen.
"I think I traumatized your man."
"Straight out by guys, I swear to Merlin!"
Draco rolled his eyes and Dora giggled.
The next couple of days were a bit of a haze for Draco. They were invited to funerals. Various funerals, actually, but the only ones they went to were those of Lavender Brown and Colin Creevey. The whole DA attended both ceremonies. Draco ended up awkwardly comforting an inconsolable Parvati Patil. He had never really understood what the other girl had seen in him, but if there was any way he could give her solace in the face of her best friend's death, he was not going to question it. Even Harry didn't show any signs of jealousy as she clung to him, crying into his shoulder. When they weren't among mourners, Harry was alternating his time between Draco, the Weasleys, and the Ministry. He knew that Kingsley relied on his help both in the preparation of the Death Eater's trials, as well as the process of tracking down the remaining ones, and Harry was eager to provide it. Not that Harry went out for actual Auror missions with them. Harry had promised Draco that much. Though Draco knew it was only a matter of time before Kingsley offered him a position. He wasn't stupid. Draco thought that after being in the center of the action for so long, he found it hard to just sit back and do nothing. Draco, on the other hand, was happy to keep to himself. He found his time around other people awfully exhausting. He mostly spent his hours in a quiet corner with a book and a cup of tea, only Aquila and Hedwig for company, if at all. Eventually, though, even he couldn't dodge Miss Weasley's invitations anymore, especially when Harry had already made so many excuses for him, and especially when Arthur and Molly Weasley decided to celebrate their wedding anniversary in a manner that involved inviting everyone and their neighbors to the Burrow.
"They want to give us all an opportunity to celebrate and get together,"
Harry told him softly when Draco dragged his feet.
"Things have been so crazy for such a long time. This is supposed to bring back a piece of normality."
Draco wanted to point out that nothing felt normal anymore, though, so going to a bloody party in the aftermath of all these funerals felt like a farce. He didn't, though. He knew the Weasleys meant well. He knew that Harry meant well. None of them was responsible for Draco's moods. The Weasleys had built up tables in their garden, and everyone was loud and cheery. The Weasley twins and Lee Jordan were chatting with Ryan a table over, and the volume of their combined voices gave Draco a headache. Harry was standing with Remus, fussing over Teddy. Hermione and Weasley were talking to Hagrid. Weasley had his arm casually slung around Hermione. Narcissa was sitting with Andromeda and Ted. You could see her throwing him concerned glances every once in a while. Draco didn't want to talk to her, though. All she would do was nag about his father, and Draco wasn't ready to have this conversation again. So Draco got to his feet and made his way into the house, sighing in relief when the door to the living room fell shut behind him, drowning out some of the noise from outside. He gingerly sat down in one of the armchairs, closing his eyes and rubbing his temples. His absence remained unnoticed for all of 5 minutes, if that. Then the door opened and Ginny poked her head inside.
"Hey, you,"
she said with a small smile.
"Who are you hiding from?"
"No one," Draco muttered. "Everyone." Ginny hummed. She stepped into the room and took a seat on the couch, watching him with a thoughtful look on her face.
"You know, Harry is practically sitting on his feet out there," she commented. "He wants to check up on you, but he also doesn't want to crowd you. It's a bit pathetic, but also really adorable."
"He's talking to everyone about me behind my back, isn't he?" Draco muttered, more bite in his voice than he had intended. Ginny raised her eyebrows.
"Actually, he hasn't said a thing to me," she explained. "It was obvious from looking at him."
"Oh," Draco said, feeling stupid.
"But I wouldn't blame him if he had," Ginny continued. "If you're not talking to us, then that's what happens, you know."
Draco remained silent, aware that he'd been called out.
Ginny sighed. "Look, Draco, I gather that you're going through a tough spot, and that's fine. It's normal, even. I would be worried if you were, to be honest. The war, it messed all of us up big time. I burst into tears last week because Fred ate my dessert. Ryan has nightmares. We all have our packages to carry. You were not alone."
Draco gulped, trying to process what Ginny had told him. She just looked at them, and then she nudged his foot with her sandaled one.
"I have no idea what's going on with you," Ginny admitted.
I wasn't with you on that camping trip. I don't know what happened there. But I was there at the end when we thought Harry had...
Draco flinched, turning his face away.
Ginny held in, watching his profile before pressing on. I saw what happened to you there, and I think it's natural that you took away some sort of trauma from that. But we're here to help, okay? You've got a lot of people who love you. Harry does, obviously. But even if you feel like you can't talk to him, and that's okay, too. Sometimes the people closest to us are the hardest to talk to. There are others. Me or Ryan, Eureka and Luna, Hermione, Remus, Laura, even my parents. We're all there if you need us.
Draco noticed that she had purposefully left out his mother. He wondered if it was obvious that Draco felt uncomfortable around her at the moment. Thanks, Draco said, clearing his throat. That's kind of you to say. It's just... His voice caught, and he coughed again, wondering how to express what he couldn't even get a grasp of himself. It's hard to talk about something that I don't understand either.
Ginny nodded, frowning.
She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Draco wasn't sure if he had just caught her off guard with his response, or if there was something she wanted to say but didn't know if she should. He didn't find out, though, because at that moment the door opened and Hermione appeared in the doorway. She smiled at them shyly.
Hey, she said. I was looking for Draco. Am I interrupting?
No. Draco shook his head and Ginny pursed her lips. Come and sit. His friend smiled at him and scooched next to Ginny. She looked good, Draco noted. Well-rested and happier than he had seen her in months. Then again, they had been on the run in the months prior. If you weren't irrationally brooding like Draco, peace was supposed to be an upgrade.
I wanted to tell you that I'm going to leave for Australia next week. She smiled at him. I'm going to go looking for my parents.
Oh! Draco said, his eyes widening. He immediately felt bad that he'd completely forgotten about Hermione's situation. He'd been too wrapped up in his own issues. Bloody hell, Hermione! Do you need us to come with you?
No, don't worry about it, she smiled. It's sweet that you're offering, but it's really not a job that needs all of us. Ron is accompanying me, and that's enough.
Okay. Draco blinked, biting his lip. Well, if you need anything.
I know you'll always be there, she assured him. You've never disappointed me in that aspect, Draco. Don't worry. I know how lucky I am to have you as a friend.
Draco frowned, a bit thrown by the sudden affection. Ginny snickered next to Hermione.
Still can't handle honest compliments. You're hopeless, Malfoy.
Hermione smiled and reached out for Draco's hand. Draco let her.
I don't think I'll be gone for more than a month or two, she told him. But if you need me, I'm only one enchanted parchment away. Okay?
Okay, Draco nodded. Good luck.
Thanks, she smiled. Truth be told, I'm nervous. What if I can't reverse the spell? What if something goes wrong?
It won't, Draco assured her. You're the most competent witch I have ever met, Hermione. And even if there are problems, you can confer with experts in the field.
You're right, she nodded. Of course you're right.
She paused, then she asked, her voice very small.
What if they're angry with me?
Draco squeezed her hand. You were just trying to protect them, he breathed. They'll forgive you. She smiled at him with glassy eyes, and then she stood and walked over to hug him tightly. Draco let her, the scent of her bushy hair nice and familiar. When she pulled away, she didn't go far. She perched herself upon the arm of Draco's chair, watching him.
What about you? She asked, her voice soft. How have you been coping?
Draco sighed, pressing himself back into the chair. Can everyone please stop analyzing me? He begged. I feel like a flubberworm in Garrett Magical Creatures class.
What a burden, being so loved, Ginny teased. We do love you, you know, Hermione emphasized, brushing his hair from his face. We just want to be here for you.
And I appreciate that, he muttered. But if I hear one more, are you okay? What's wrong? I might actually scream. Hermione chewed on her lip for a long moment, then nodded.
Fine, she agreed. We're just worried, that's all. Harry's worried.
I know he is, Draco said. His behavior makes it very obvious. As if they had conjured him, the door opened and Harry appeared. He lingered in the doorway with clear hesitation. Hey, he said, forcibly casual. You're having your own private party? Draco glanced at Hermione, pointedly.
She bit her lip hard, trying not to laugh. Ginny was the one to take pity on him and answer, "Thought we better get out of the way before my boyfriend and my brothers caused some sort of mayhem out there." She rolled her eyes fondly. "Don't think I didn't see them strategize. It's going to be ugly." Harry cracked a smile before meeting Draco's eyes. His expression was more insecure than it should be, Draco realized, and it made him feel guilty. He made an attempt to soften his expression. "Want to join us?" he asked. Harry's responding smile brightened his face, like the moon breaking through a cloudy night.
"I'd love to,"
he said.